Welcome to Finding You Now. I'm your host, Amanda Ashworth, and on today's show, we have Jasmine Navarro. Jasmine is a well-being expert who specialises in confidence with both adults and teens. So welcome, Jasmine.
Thank you so much, Amanda, for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here.
So do you want to start by telling us kind of a bit about yourself, your backstory, how you ended up in Dubai and kind of got to specialising with confidence?
Okay, I'll try and keep this short because it's a long story. Basically, I went through like traumatic grief when I was a teenager. I found out that my dad died, but I found out in the newspaper. So it was like a huge shock. I was 18, and at the time, like my mum's amazing, but nobody knew how to deal with me and the situation. There was not really any emotional awareness. So I had all these emotions that I was feeling, shock and a million other emotions. And I didn't know what to do, and nobody was talking about it. Anyway, so I had periods of depression. But when I was feeling okay, I trained as a teacher and decided to leave the UK because I just had to get out of that situation. And I always loved traveling anyway. So this just seemed like the perfect solution. Anyway, so I ended up living and working in 11 countries teaching.
Wow.
Yeah. And, some of them are quite challenging, of course it was amazing. And I feel lucky to have done it, but it was hard because I was carrying this grief. Anyway, I came to Dubai 8 years ago as a teacher. And that's when I just decided, I don't know if it was the right time or what happened, but I just thought, I don't want to keep living in different countries. It's time to change my career and all of this. So I thought, what can I do? And I kept meeting coactive coaches, and I thought, this is definitely a sign. So I decided to do the training, not to become a coach, but to work on myself, because I think maybe intuitively I knew it was time to sort of face that grief. So I completed the training, and during each course, it was so transformational and powerful and really uncomfortable, and I didn't actually like it, but I knew it was the right thing to do, and I had to keep going, keep working through it. And at the end, I realized, how important it was to work on yourself. And then I just thought, this is what I want to do. You don't need to change your job, your country, everything. You can just work on yourself, and things are much better that way. So I got certified and I started coaching adults, and I still coach adults. But then I thought, you know what, I want to work with teenagers as well, because I do believe the younger we know this, the better, the importance of working on ourselves. So I started, and I obviously thought of myself when I was a teen. If I'd have had these tools and techniques, things would have been much easier because I didn't have any.
Why do you think they're not emotional well-being and emotional intelligence isn't taught in school? Because it's so transformational, and I
Yeah.
see that I'm working with women a lot to do with things that happened in their teens and kind
Oh,
of
yeah,
early adulthood
exactly.
that they weren't prepared for. And why do you
Yeah.
think it's not taught in schools?
Well, I think back then there wasn't awareness of how important it was. I mean, people still obviously spoke about mental health in the UK back then. Like
Hmm.
depression was known. Um, but maybe now I actually don't know why it's not. Then I think it was just lack of awareness. Now we do have the awareness, don't we? Maybe it's just hard to change these curriculums. I don't know. It's
Yeah.
changing, isn't it? Things people find change very hard. So maybe I have no idea, to be honest, Amanda.
And so, what were the things that when you were doing your course and it was feeling uncomfortable, what were the things that were showing up for you?
Emotions,
Yeah.
basically. It was emotion. It was all emotions, and the fact that we had to do it in front of people, which was,
Right.
you know, showing your vulnerability in front of a room full of strangers. My worst nightmare. But it was the emotions that I was starting to connect with, which I never had before, because I think when I was feeling all those emotions before, obviously I knew what I was feeling, but I couldn't put it into words because and nobody was asking me, nobody. So it's sort of I learned how to identify emotions. It was just the emotions, and I thought, wow, I can feel. I'm allowed to feel. And it came up in so many, like, 'cause we had lots of pair work and group work. It just kept coming up, these emotions, and I can feel. Whereas I think probably for so long, 20 years, I'd held on to these, pushed these emotions down,
Yeah.
didn't feel them because it was too horrendous to feel them.
Okay. And so, what would you say is the biggest difference if, say, someone's working with you as opposed to working with a therapist and kind of exploring
Yeah,
emotions?
well, I guess therapy is more about focusing on the past. Yeah. Whereas coaching is more about present and future and taking action. So they're the key differences. There's always an action to be taken after a coach session, whereas, and it's about, yeah, moving forward, taking action, moving forward. And you don't really talk about the past at all. But yeah, like I said, therapy is more about the past, and there doesn't necessarily have to be an action. It's about finding out, what happened, why, how it affected you, and all of this. But it's the past, the past, the past. So, of course, I think ideally, but I know it's very expensive, but to have a coach and a therapist at the
Yep.
same time, it's amazing because then you're doing past, present, and future. But I have had therapy as well, but coaching really, really helped because I think it gives you the awareness. And if you don't have the awareness, then, I wasn't even aware I was carrying all of those emotions.
Yeah.
Coaching helped me realize that.
Yeah, and I think one thing that kind of stood for me is that I went through a big coaching kind of
Did
experience
you?
with a few
Really?
different coaches, yeah. And I started because I identified some limiting beliefs that I was having that kept
Yes.
showing up, and kind of as I was getting older, they were showing up more, and I was like, okay,
Yeah,
just no. But I think it really highlighted when I first started looking for a coach the importance of finding the right coach that suits your needs at that
definitely.
moment.
That's true.
So at the moment, I'm looking for a business coach because that's what suits my needs. And
Yes.
it's having somebody that maybe holds you accountable. But I think a lot of the people that I work with don't know how to identify that kind of internal wisdom and trusting
Yeah.
their voice because they've never used it.
Exactly. Exactly. That's exactly it. And I think, like they say in coaching, we have all of the answers, but maybe we just have lost access to them. And a coach can help you gain that connection and access to your inner resources. And that's why it's so powerful. But like you said, most of the time, yeah, we haven't used them. We weren't encouraged. We haven't been encouraged to just listen to ourselves. So there's that disconnection. And that's the thing. When you have that disconnection with yourself, you're going to have that disconnection with everything else, aren't you? All the other
Yeah.
relationships.
Yeah. And then that really kind of when we're looking at boundaries, that not listening to yourself and kind of aligning with your values, then how do you set up clear boundaries with other people if you don't know what you're looking for?
Exactly. And it all starts with having that boundary with yourself, setting that boundary with yourself. That's the thing. If you don't have clear boundaries with yourself, then there's no way you can have clear boundaries with others. And that's one thing I definitely didn't learn. Clear having boundaries.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, and that I think therapy does help with that. Coaching can help with that as well because it can bring that awareness
Mm.
and, like you said, to identify um, limiting beliefs. Because if you think deep down that, I don't know, you're not good enough and whatever you do is not enough, then probably you're always going to live your life saying yes to everything and everyone. So
Yeah.
there's no boundaries because you're always trying to, nothing's enough. So
Mm.
if you don't solve that limiting belief, then it doesn't matter what you do because it would always come back. And
Yeah.
so you do have to go within. There's no other way,
Yeah.
is there? There's
And
no
I
other
think
way.
and I think with limiting beliefs, they never completely go away either. And just when you thought that you've solved some, you go through a transition in your life and then others show up and you're like, okay, you know,
Yeah, the next level. It's the next
yeah.
level.
And it's
Actually,
about obviously your brain a lot of the time just trying to keep you safe. One of the
definitely.
things that I kind of comes up a lot for me with some of the ladies that I work with is how they show up for themselves. So it's a question that we don't often think about
No,
and ask. How do you show up for yourself?
that's very important. Do you just, I'm not even sure what that means. So, how you show up for yourself, you just mean how you are with yourself.
Yeah, or how you show up for your higher self and your future self as well.
Wow. Okay. I'm just trying to think if I can understand what you mean. So, how I show up for myself. Well, since I've done so much inner work, of course, there's so much more to go. Like you
Yeah.
said, you get to the next level, deeper, deeper, deeper. Um, But nowadays, for example, I'm very aware of what I'm saying to myself. Like for I don't know how long, for I guess the first part of my life, years and years and years, I was always beating myself up. I was always angry with myself, blaming myself. And I think that was to do with the trauma I went through. But it just
Yeah.
continued in every part of my life. So when I started this coaching journey and working on myself, I made a promise. I said, from now on, for the second half of my life, I will be kind to myself. I will not be horrible to myself. I promise myself. I promise myself. And of course, sometimes it might slip back, but generally I'm much kinder to myself. That's the biggest difference in my life. And like when I look in the mirror now, like before, I don't even know what I used to say to myself, horrible things. But now I don't. I say nice things, and I mean it this time, because you go through levels, don't you? First of all, you look in the mirror and it's like, and then you might say something nice and you don't believe it. But now I'm at the point where I look in the mirror and I believe it. Like
Yeah.
so I think that's the biggest thing, how I show up for myself, is being kind to myself, letting myself off. If I make a mistake, letting myself off.
Yeah, so one of the things that I talk about a lot is that internal voice, and recognizing that internal voice, and recognizing that most of what it tells you isn't true. It's just to stop you from taking an action or to keep you safe, and and recognizing when it gets louder and what you can do to actually go, is this really true?
Yes, exactly. And I think for me, it always comes back to the emotions. I know it starts with the thoughts, but for me, it was really helpful to identify the emotions and really, really process them. And that's what I do with my clients. Like, really, what is the name of this emotion? Where is it in my body? What is the message?
Yeah.
And sort of not being afraid of it, like maybe I was before, like, oh, it's not a nice, comfortable feeling. Let's just ignore this, distract myself, do anything but feel this. But now I know you really have to feel it. And even if it's really uncomfortable, now I sort of try and welcome that feeling, even though it's sometimes it doesn't work and I'm like, oh, but welcome that feeling, feel it, and get the message. So for me, it comes back to that again, or write it down.
I think the one thing that we're not taught ever to do is to sit within an emotion.
Yes,
until
exactly.
it becomes comfortable.
Yeah. And you can get really overwhelmed by your emotions because, and that's the thing. Sometimes you're not just feeling one emotion, are you? You can be feeling like a few.
Yeah.
And to be able to just break them down. And you can turn it off any time. Like if you don't want to feel it, you don't have to. So knowing that you are in control as well.
So when you're working with a client and they come to you and they're like, Jasmine, I've got my confidence is zero. How do you start to work with them to build their confidence?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's many ways because it depends on what works best for them. Like with this coaching, there's so many different techniques. But the first thing, obviously, once we've built the rapport and everything, I normally, because it's all about the present and future, I do a lot of visualizations with my clients because I feel like a lot of the time we're stuck in our head with our thoughts and you can just get sort of overwhelmed and paralyzed and you can't really think. You're just going round and round, aren't you? So it's always try to bring them back to their body because the body has all of the answers. It's simple, it's easier, and we need to connect to our body full of where our wisdom is. So what I normally do is I would say, imagine maybe a year in the future. So I really get them to visualize how they see their confident self. So that's how I would normally start. So that gives them some clarity, some hope, some insight, and it connects them with themselves as well. And then also when they're still in that sort of state of visualizing, I'd say, what does your body say that you should do now? Like what's one step that you can take? And they always come up with the answers. I never tell them anything, because what works for obviously me, it might not work for them or somebody else. So they come up with the answers, but I will ask them lots of questions. But a lot of the time when they're visualizing, that's when the really powerful answers come in, especially when they haven't done many visualizations,
Mm.
or it's, at the beginning of our sort of coaching sessions,
Yeah.
it's a lot more powerful.
And
Sense.
with with confidence, how do you think confidence is kind of built?
Yeah, well, I think, like, for example, like when I was teaching for like 20 years or whatever, I was very confident at my job. You know, from the outside, I looked very confident. I was confident. I had self-confidence. But what I realized after working on myself and dealing with my core wounds, I realized I didn't have core confidence. And so for me, self-confidence is, what you get from external factors, maybe, I don't know, maybe from your job, or I guess job can be both because you can achieve things that can be internal. But I think having core confidence is a combination of, core confidence is, what comes from inside,
Inside. Okay.
and self-confidence is more external, and
Mm.
it can be taken away. Like you could lose your job, for example, so that could be taken away. And what have you got left? Core confidence is something inside and it can't be taken away. And I realized I didn't have that because I hadn't addressed these core wounds. So even though I was doing well in my job, my relationships, for example, were not doing well, like with my partner and things like that.
Yeah.
I was emotionally unavailable. They were emotionally unavailable as well. Like it just didn't work because
Right.
I had that emotional core wound.
And do you think core confidence and self-esteem are similar, or are they completely separate?
Yeah, I think if you were going to compare it, I would say it's core confidence is more connected with self-esteem than
Because
self-confidence.
I think
Yes,
people can look really confident on the outside, but then actually when you get below the surface,
yes,
that's not how they view themselves.
yes, exactly.
And that's not necessarily how they view that the outside world sees them.
Exactly. You've got all these different perspectives going on as well, haven't you? I think when you address your core wounds, that gives you core confidence, which higher your self-esteem. It's
And so
all
how would you
connected.
go about building your core confidence?
It's about going deeper again, addressing your core wounds,
Yeah.
because and your core beliefs, but the painful events that you've had in your life, we've all had them. So I think it's about addressing those, and working on your limiting beliefs, becoming aware if there's any trapped emotion that you haven't processed because of those
Mm.
traumatic events. Or it doesn't have to be, I mean, trauma can be, big, small.
Yeah.
Process those emotions and then heal yourself, and
And how
then
much do you think then action plays a part in building confidence?
action. Well, I guess action is, a lot. I think a lot,
Yeah.
because if you don't take action, taking action could just be go into your session. You have to take all of the action. Journaling, for
Yeah.
example, or however self-care looks like to you, you need to do it. And that's the thing. We can have therapy, coaching, but at the end of the day, we are responsible for our own healing. Even
Yeah.
if it's not our fault that we had these events happen to us, we are responsible for healing us. No, I don't believe anybody can heal us. People can help us and be there for us and guide us, and that's really, really
Mm.
impactful. But at the end of the day, nobody really, really knows what's going on inside of us.
No.
Nobody's in our shoes. So we really have to do it ourselves. But there's a lot of help out there. But I think we have to take the action. It's all down to us. And I
Yeah.
always think that every time I have a problem in my life, I always think, okay, what do I need to work on? Like it always comes from us.
Mm. Yeah. And the things, as I say, the things that will show up will be different at different stages, and you're like, okay.
Yes,
And this is somewhat annoying about the self-development journey,
I
because
know.
it is it's a lifelong journey, and
Yes,
you're never going to be, but then that's, I don't know, you're on the path to finding your true self.
exactly. And it will always change because as you're growing, you're changing. So everything's always evolving and changing anyway. But I do think, even though it's been so difficult, I'd say this from my experience, it's been really difficult, and I think it's not easy for anyone. But I would not change it, because then I
No.
think if that hadn't have happened, then I would possibly still be really unhappy, but just not know why.
Yeah. And we were talking briefly before we came on about if you don't have confidence as a parent and you don't have boundaries, especially if you don't have boundaries, and it's very
Yeah,
hard to teach your children. And
yeah.
I have quite a few friends that have teenage girls. How
Wow.
do you start to teach them boundaries?
Well, yeah, it all starts with, and like you said, yeah, children do what they see, not what they hear.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah. I guess I do work a lot with teenage girls, actually, and it all starts with, them building the relationship with themselves.
Yeah.
So, we do lots of different awareness activities, and it all comes from them. And once they start feeling, it depends, obviously, because every person I've worked with comes with a different problem, but normally it's related to self-confidence.
Yeah.
You know, they haven't got any friends, or they can't raise their hand in class. People will laugh at them. They're being bullied. All of these things. But once they start being able to speak
Yeah.
up for themselves, find their voice. You know, and and listen to what feels right for them. Learning to trust their intuition and their body,
Mm.
and what they want to say no to, what doesn't feel right, and learning that they can trust that. It all comes from them as well. It's just, I'm just there asking them questions, and helping them identify how they feel about certain situations. If it doesn't feel right, then it's probably not right.
Yeah.
um so, and giving them, helping them, yeah, be confident in themselves. But they're doing it, because of course if I told them, it wouldn't work anyway. It wouldn't be empowering. Like,
Yeah. So I have 3 and 5-year-old girls, and they're
okay,
still at the stage when they look in the mirror, they love themselves and they
yeah,
are huge cheerleaders of themselves. And
wow,
we really encouraged that. So,
amazing.
that my daughter was saying something the other day, and but she was like, "But you taught me how to crawl," and I was like, "I didn't teach you how to crawl, just like I didn't teach you how to talk or walk or rollerblade or ice skate. You taught yourself how to do all of
Wow,
these things.
yeah.
I just watched you learn, and you learned that if you didn't give up, that you would eventually be able to do it." And it just like it and this is, I think it baffles me and kind of intrigues me as well. How do you go from that point to being almost like an adult that doesn't believe in themselves at all?
I guess it depends, doesn't it, on
Yeah.
your, like, for example, my mum, she was always very, Jasmine, you can do anything, so positive
Mm.
towards me, so positive. You do whatever you like. But she didn't have, she was insecure, lack of
Yeah.
self-esteem, really. So I think, even though she was always saying to me, you're amazing, you can do this, probably subconsciously I picked up on how she was with herself.
Yeah.
Like, I'd always remember, if anyone gave her a compliment, she'd be, no, no, no. She never accepted any compliment ever, or, oh no, look at the state of me. Always putting herself down, but in a jokey way. I
Yeah.
think these tiny things, as a child, you pick up on everything, you feel everything. you know just because you're not an adult, you feel, and you know exactly what's going on. So
And
I think, yeah.
I think that's what's really interesting, again, when you talk about compliments. And it's somewhat cultural as well, because I've watched my
Amazing.
American friends who are
Yeah.
very proud of their achievements, and but we're
Yes. Yeah.
almost taught not,
Yeah.
quite quiet about what we've
Definitely.
achieved. And I know I for one, I'm working on receiving compliments far more.
Oh
And
yeah,
because
definitely.
you just almost try to bat them away.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's that thing about going, well, once you give yourself permission to be you, then it almost gives other people the permission to be
100%.
themselves.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, but
You said so.
we're not our own cheerleaders very often at all.
No, and you're right. I think it could be partly cultural as well. And but I think because that's what I realized. I was always giving, people pleasing, all of this. I knew I couldn't receive anything. And I realized my mum was the same. I thought, I must have picked that up from my mum, but of course you can't. I mean, I don't blame anyone or anything like that. But yeah. And I think it comes back to believing, you having a limiting belief that you're not deserving. I don't
Yeah.
deserve this. So if you don't, that's the thing, if you don't heal that belief, then you're not really going to change,
Yeah.
long term.
And
So
what's the limiting belief that comes up most often for you when you're working with people?
I'm not enough.
Yeah.
I think we all have. If I'm not deserving, I'm not enough. These two
Yeah.
are huge, absolutely huge. I think, in fact, nearly everybody I've worked with,
Yeah.
girls,
And I think
guys, from
by not actually sitting down on a regular basis and going, actually, what's going well in my life and what am
yes,
I good at? Like, because once you start believing you're good at things,
yeah, yeah.
it changes.
You might even, but the thing is, yeah, you might even believe that definitely does. Asking yourself different questions, quality questions. And that's
Yeah.
what I teach my clients. Ask yourself a quality question, not like, why am I so stupid?
Yeah.
Your brain will always come up with an answer. But I forgot what I was going to say, Amanda, sorry.
No worries. So then as a woman, so
Yeah,
generally I find that there is almost a pattern across a lot of the women that I meet that they, from a very young age, have been taught to suppress how they feel,
yeah,
to please others, and then they don't have any boundaries at all. So then, when it comes to finding their voice because they're feeling overwhelmed or just at the end of their tether almost, because
yeah, yeah,
they do have internal boundaries, but they've never actually clarified them. So when they're like, enough is enough,
yeah.
it's like, how do you stop yourself from getting to that point? So you're an adult and you have always people pleased. How do you begin to start finding your voice?
Um, yeah, no, good question. I think, the 5 why
Yeah.
technique. Yeah, I think that's a good place to start, isn't it?
Yeah.
So there's a few people that have spoken about that. The one I know is Dr. Ish Major. I don't know which one you've heard of.
So Simon Sinek also has a book with starting with why, which is a very good
No, the
book.
5 whys. The
The
five
five
why.
whys, but he also, again, it's similar to the five whys,
Oh,
but
is it?
again, looking at, why and kind of bringing
Oh,
that
okay.
back. I think one of the things that I find is we don't live consciously enough and intentionally enough. So we don't
Definitely.
often take time to sit and
Yeah,
go,
because we're on this treadmill of just absolute autopilot nightmare. And I think, and normally when you're on that treadmill and you're just going, 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 normally you only stop if you either start working on yourself or something bad happens in your life that breaks
oh,
that, makes you stop. And then you
yeah,
realize, oh no, which sadly is probably happens, I don't know how often. But I think if you, the first thing, maybe start journaling. Start seeing what is actually going on in your mind. Like, what are you actually thinking? Because when we're so busy, we don't even have time to, like, sometimes I say to people, spend 5 minutes a day just asking yourself how you're feeling and see if you can identify the feelings. Oh, I haven't got time for this. It's like,
yeah.
5 minutes. 5 minutes. We do have time. Like, if you don't have time for yourself, then that is a serious, you've got a problem. Yeah, that
Well,
you need
I,
it
I
even
think
more.
I think the thing is we don't make time. So,
Yes.
like for example, couples, the thing that they do most together is watch television, which is the
Yeah.
lowest vibrational thing that we can do, and obviously doesn't bring us connection. So although we're together, we're not having conversations, we're not
Yeah.
connecting.
Routine
Um,
habits.
yeah, so we form these habits and then we go, well, actually we don't have time. So journaling is brilliant. And I really struggled with it, to sit and almost look at like a blank page or a blank screen. So I found journal prompts. So if
Okay.
there's a particular area that I'm wanting to focus on, a question can sometimes make me think a bit more deeply.
True. It gives you somewhere to start, because I think a lot of people, they see that blank page and they're like, where on earth do I start? I think what I do now, because what made me not want to journal when I was, I would judge myself, and I wanted something great to come out or something.
Mm.
But I think that really helped when I removed that, and it's like, I'll just write whatever, just let myself write whatever. There's no rule. But I
Yeah.
think that can be quite hard to just remove all of those blocks.
Yeah, and I think what that does is it puts kind of sometimes pain or friction in, which then you're like, I don't really want to do this. Whereas like
Oh,
the
okay.
5 minute journaling, or as I say, the journal prompts can be quite helpful. It's
Yeah.
the same with meditations. And I've just gone through the 6 days meditation training.
Okay.
Um, and
I've
that's
done
been a
that.
really interesting experience, because the reason I ended up doing my coaching course is I was realizing that my focus wasn't great. And I was like, I want to address this, and
Yeah.
this is the route that I'm going to go down.
Yeah.
And actually, it led me to finding purpose as well. That I was like, when I'm in a coaching session, there is no issue with my focus. I'm completely present.
Wow.
But meditation, of being aware of how active your voice is in your brain,
Wow. Yeah.
but then also looking almost deeper and looking for, so whether or not it's a higher self or a spirit guide or an internal voice, of sometimes what that's trying to tell you.
Amazing. Like intuition, you mean?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're taught not to trust at all.
True. True. What I normally like, I like going to the beach at night time. I think for me, that's my meditation.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think it's what, because it doesn't have to be, because a lot of people say, oh, I can't meditate, but it doesn't have to be just sitting down and doing that. It's whatever you feel, whatever helps you connect with yourself.
But there's lots of different meditations. So I do a guided walking meditation.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because again, sitting down
Yes.
sometimes can be a bit like, and it's just sometimes about noticing your surroundings. Um,
Yeah.
but like for me, we live a minute from the beach, and the beach is my happy place,
Oh,
and it's
yeah.
the place that I go to ground, and it's the place
Definitely.
that I just
Yes.
go to appreciate, and it's the place that fills my soul up.
Oh, yeah. Especially when there's the moon there.
Yeah.
That is just
We
it.
have, I think we have some of the best sunsets here,
Oh,
that
yeah.
they're
Oh, yeah.
incredible.
Amazing. Amazing. Exactly. Exactly. Just being around nature is absolutely, you feel always feel good when
Yeah.
I'm around nature.
And so what do you find? So you've got the core confidence, and then what do you
Yeah.
find are the things that start to show up that generally dent people's kind of higher level confidence?
So, what shows up to make them not feel themselves?
Yeah. So like I find motherhood seems to just
Oh,
like shake people completely.
work. I think being in a job that you're unhappy with,
Yeah.
I think that's a lot of clients like I work with. Yeah, they're in a job, they're working really hard, but they're just really unhappy.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think, and they know they're in the wrong job, but you can't just change a job that quickly.
No.
That can be hard. But then once, they start working on themselves, they see things differently, and they see other opportunities. Because sometimes when you're so unhappy, it's like a cloud, isn't it? It's like a block. You can't
Yeah.
really see anything else. Um, so I think, yeah, being unhappy in their job, but yeah, but probably it's being unhappy with themselves. That's probably what
Yeah.
it
And do
is.
you see, so I was having this conversation earlier, we were talking about applying for jobs. And there is a definite difference between men and women when it comes to applying for jobs.
Oh yeah,
I find that a man can do 10 out of 2 out of the 10 things that this job requires, and they'll still say, I'm qualified enough to do this job.
definitely.
Whereas a woman, it's 9 or 10, and they're still saying, I'm not qualified enough.
That's really sad when you think about it. It's like, I mean, it's so sad, because it just feels like, because of how everything is, what an effect that's had on us
Yeah.
as women.
Yeah. And I think it's so important for us to almost take stock, because I find that
Yes.
women, because you're not that same person you were when you were in the corporate world if you've been at home for a few years. You know, life has changed. What you want from life has changed. But
Yeah.
that process of self-discovery again, of going, actually, what does this next chapter look like?
Yeah. And I think, and like I said, a change, big changes are really, really hard because you just feel like you're sort of starting again. But I think if you do have the privilege of being able to work with somebody else,
Mm.
you know, because like you said, you have that accountability, that support, somebody just to share what you're feeling and to know that actually it's completely normal. Because I think a lot of, actually, what I forgot to say is a lot of, actually, all of the clients I've worked with, from teenage girls to older men, loneliness
Yeah.
is the thing. And I think, if maybe, yeah, you've left your corporate job, you've become a mum, I think if you're not sharing it with anybody how you're feeling, I think the loneliness is actually the thing that makes everything 10,000 times harder. Because I think,
Mm.
I don't know what you think about that, but I think when you
Yeah.
can share your problems and you've got someone to talk to and you don't feel alone, I think you can feel so much better. Just being validated, but then learning to validate yourself.
And why do you think it seems to be it seems that it's getting harder and harder for people to make connections,
Yeah,
and
well,
more people are lonely?
I guess social media,
Yeah.
and people are working from home a lot now. But I think social media, because it has a huge effect on us, doesn't it? You see everybody living this perfect life, even though they're not.
Mm.
It sort of, it can be a little bit isolating.
Yeah. I'm hoping that my girls, as they get older, will be similar to my son, who has no
Yes.
interest in social media, because I'm like,
Oh, wow.
although I like it from a work perspective, I don't like the fact that
Yeah.
it drives people because they're wanting connection, but
Yes. But then
actually
yeah.
it's not a connection at all. It's
No.
superficial. And there are some really shocking stats now coming out, to do with connections. So, there was a stat recently that the average man under 30 in America hasn't had sex in the last 12 months. And the amount of women that are choosing not to start families. And it's like, what?
Why do you think
Because
that is? Yeah.
I don't know. I think it's because we're growing up with this lack of connection.
Oh, do you?
Yeah.
See,
And
I
I
was
think,
thinking maybe it's because people are so stressed they just can't even think about having a family.
no, but there's like stats that we're now learning to drive later. We're not taking as many risks. So we're
Oh.
almost staying in this kind of
Oh.
safe little bubble. And, you know,
Wow.
and then so I think like dating, being younger, is getting harder and harder. But
Yes.
it's it's this
Yeah.
thing of, if you don't obviously put yourself out there, yes, there could be rejection.
Yeah. But you really have to put yourself out there now, don't you? Whereas
Yeah.
before, it was just normal to put yourself out there because you were already out there.
Well, you just meet somebody, but
Exactly.
then the thing that overall impacts everybody's health the most is the relationships that they have. So I was reading, I don't know if you've come across a guy called Ali Abdul. He's a YouTuber who
Oh, I don't know.
talked about,
I look.
he was a doctor from Cambridge, so he talked about productivity a lot, but he spoke at an event last week. So I was reading his email letter yesterday, and he met with a guy called, just trying to remember, Bill something. He's got a book called Die with Zero. And this guy's advice to Ali was, get yourself a relationship coach, because relationships are the number one thing in your
Cool.
life. So
But
you would get yourself a golf coach, a tennis coach, a PT.
at the end of the day, I think all coaches work on the relationship with yourself anyway. So
Yeah.
I think when you've done that, then all the other relationships work out naturally, I believe.
But do you find that when somebody doesn't view themselves in a good light, that actually that starts to spill out into their relationships externally?
100%. Definitely. Yeah, the relationship we have with ourselves sets the tone for all relationships. 100%. Like, if you don't think you're deserving, you will go out and find someone who agrees with you.
Yeah.
doesn't think you're deserving. Like it's like a mirror, isn't it? They say it, the world is your mirror. Like it's so true. It's so true.
Yeah.
And even like, funnily enough, now I'm much kinder to myself now. I feel like my friendships, I've got more quality friendships, and people are kinder to me in general because I'm kinder to myself. You know,
Yeah.
everything starts with us, everything. So I really do. Once we, there's nothing, that is the most important relationship, isn't it? The one we have with ourselves. It sets the
Yeah.
tone.
And we're an energy. So, you know,
Yes,
the
exactly. That
more,
as
the
well.
better we think about ourselves, the higher our vibration and our energy level,
Yes.
which is
Yes.
why you would attract better people
Yeah.
into your
That
life. So, what tips would you give to somebody that wants to work on their confidence?
I'd say like emotional awareness, I think. So work on their, I think I'd emotional, like learn about their emotions, become emotionally aware, because I think emotional awareness leads to emotional well-being, which leads to core confidence, which leads to happiness, I think. So I think the first step is asking yourself every day, how am I feeling? Try to name those feelings and write them down. And that's it. Start off with that. Like, I really do believe starting with tiny, 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 tiny steps. But, our emotions have learning to identify emotions and use our emotions as an important tool is, our body gave us this tool. Like, let's
Yeah.
use it. So I would say start with that, identifying your emotions. And that can lead to so many other things, because then you'll learn more about yourself. You'll learn what needs to be healed, so then you can start working on that. So, yeah, that's the first thing I would say. And taking tiny actions, or find a friend who you really trust and who you can share things with. Like, I have a friend, and every week I have a coach as well, but I have a friend, and we send each other voice notes, and we say how we're really feeling,
Yeah.
and this is something you don't want to share with everybody. And just, even, she doesn't actually do anything, but just me saying how I'm feeling, I start realizing things myself.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, find a
And
good.
I think we're taught to mask our feelings a lot. So I was reading an
Yeah.
article yesterday to do with time out with children, and that actually time out with children is actually can be a bad thing because it teaches them to mask their emotions, to give the response that the
Oh,
adult wants. And because again, I've been thinking a lot
wow.
to do with limiting beliefs, because obviously a limiting belief is generally formed between the ages of 0 and 5. And sometimes up to the age of 7. Whereas I think for my 5-year-old, I think she's got a good life. But then I'm like, oh, what limiting beliefs, does she already have that we
Wow.
won't be aware of until a later
Oh,
date? So it's this whole thing of, we've got so much better with children of allowing emotions as well, and
yeah,
allowing big emotions and not trying to get children to suppress emotions. But obviously, as soon as they enter the school system, there is an element of people pleasing
yeah.
and peer pressure that comes in.
I think what happens at home is I think is the most important thing. Like, if you've
Yeah.
got effective communication at home, I think that's your sort of foundation. I really
Yeah.
do believe that. I really do believe that everything starts at home. So you can
Yeah.
really prepare. But of course, I guess you can't protect your children from everything. All you can do is prepare them. But I think effective communication, because if they learn that they can tell you anything and they trust you, you know,
Mm.
because I think that's what was missing when I was growing up. It was effective communication. Of course, we
Yeah.
spoke, but we didn't talk about like real important things,
And I think
uncomfortable things.
that's quite key, because I think, especially now, we almost want to wrap children up and kind of
Yeah,
protect them in, like, but then when something
no,
happens, they
yes,
don't have the skills to then deal
exactly,
with that, because
exactly.
actually we've shied away from actually
Yeah,
but obviously
totally.
what one child would find traumatic, another child wouldn't, and there's no way of
True,
telling
true.
until they're older.
We have to encourage mistakes. We have to encourage mistakes, because how on earth do we learn? I
Yeah.
mean, it's the
And we're
only way.
taught
And that's the
from a
thing.
very
Yeah,
young age that failing and making mistakes
exactly.
is a bad thing.
Exactly. Imagine it's the best. Well, I don't want to say it's the best thing, but I mean, it's the way we grow. We
Yeah.
need to embrace it. I know it's not always easy, but nothing's easy, is it? So
No, no. And I think it's this, I think we're like, so what I find is like my generation is far better at thinking about a child's emotional needs. But
yeah,
as I say, at the same time, it's sometimes also like with my children, is identifying whether or not, if I'm wanting them to behave in a certain way, whether or not it's me or them, and just going, actually, if I'm busy, does this matter right now? And can I be present because
wow, that's
they need
amazing.
me?
That's amazing.
But I think we just need to, I don't think as parents, we quite often sit down and think about what kind of parent we want to be. Because I'm sure with your mum, she never sat down and thought,
Shouldn't have
okay,
time, probably. Yeah,
yeah, this is where my weaknesses are, and actually I want this to be my child's strength.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
how do people work with you?
How do people work with me? They can contact me on my Instagram with Nava, my LinkedIn,
Yeah.
Jasmine Navarro, my website withnava.com.
Okay. And you do weekly LinkedIn
I
interviews?
do weekly LinkedIn lives as well, every Wednesday, 6 o'clock.
Okay, brilliant. Okay,
Yeah,
well, no, this conversation's been lovely, and I hope
thanks
the
so
listeners can
much.
take something away. And so, what did you say on Instagram you were? Your
With
handle?
Nava.
With Nava. Okay, brilliant. Okay, well, thanks, Jasmine.
Thank you so much, Amanda. Lovely to speak to you.
You too.